Hey, buddy, wake up. It's December 2016. Man, it's been such a crazy year. There's no way the world could get any wilder than it is right now. At least we'll always have Star Wars movies as an escape. And it's never been a more interesting time to be a Star Wars fan. With Disney at the reins of the franchise, they have their first movie in the can. Episode 7 of a new sequel trilogy, The Force Awakens. Not everybody loved it, but it inspired a wave of positive attitude in the fandom. Even the original trilogy diehards and prequel trilogy defenders are putting aside their differences with Episode 8 on the horizon. With rumors and speculation swirling, the only thing we can really be certain of is that Episode 8 will be so much better than The Force Awakens. But of course, there are still growing pains as we get used to the idea of Disney lording over Star Wars.
Quiet!
You be quiet.
Okay, boss man, I like how you take charge. Be quiet, my son is sleeping.
The new animated show looks a lot cheaper than the last one. The big video game releases are few and far between. The decanonization of old continuity is still a fresh wound. But just because George Lucas has moved on doesn't mean that Star Wars is dead. Surely a new golden age is right around the corner for these movies and us fans. Why, even this very month, which I remind you for the sake of this opening bit is December 2016, we will see the release of the very first of who knows how many anthological spin-offs. Something called Rogue One, a Star Wars story. I didn't expect much from Rogue One at first. I'm not sure how much anybody did. The first thing we learned about the movie was that the plot would cover the first couple paragraphs from A New Hope's opening crawl. In other words, the theft of the Death Star plans. Apart from casting and character names, we didn't learn all that much else about the plot until the point of release. The title was plagued with rumors of production woes and conflicts between the studio and the director, Gareth Edwards, with extensive reshoots being done by Tony Gilroy. Not that production difficulties or reshoots are the kiss of death, but it was a clear indication that Rogue One would be more of a by-committee effort. Considering that the much more anticipated Episode 8 was still a year away, hype levels for Rogue One were relatively low. So it was a surprise, to be sure, but a welcome one, when Rogue One turned out to be something of a sleeper hit, and positive word of mouth kept it in the box office charts for weeks, eventually crossing the $1 billion mark. What the previously mysterious Rogue One turned out to be was a military espionage thriller set smack dab in the middle of the Star Wars timeline. But its approach was more Tom Clancy than Ian Fleming. Grounded, gritty, semi-realistic, and committed to the used future aesthetic that the franchise is known for. Every element of Rogue One is scraped from the grimiest layer of the galaxy far, far away. It's hardly a masterpiece, but it does something unique that few movies ever attempt, and that's kill everybody in it. That's a point worth dwelling on. Rogue One is a story where everybody dies. Without that central idea, this story does not exist. The specter of death looms throughout the narrative and imagery. Within the first act of the story, the main character Jyn's mother is killed right in front of her by soldiers called Death Troopers. A few scenes later, the other main character, Cassian, kills an informant to cover his tracks. Then he's chased by stormtroopers, which were designed back in the 70s to look deathly and skeletal. We soon meet K2SO, our droid sidekick for the next couple hours, who looks pretty deathly and skeletal himself. The rebel extremist Saw Gerrera looks like he could die at any moment, and even his sidekick Idrio Two Tubes has yet another deathly skeletal design. When you're watching this movie, you're never far away from a reminder of death. As the theme of death progresses, so too do the pacing and the stakes, getting faster and more intense through each of 4 acts until we are careening through to the climax. We enter the second act understanding that the heroes of Rogue One are lowlifes, a former terrorist and a current spy. People who often confront death, and understand how cheap life can be. K2SO, a reprogrammed Imperial droid, lightens the mood.
I'm a reprogrammed Imperial droid.
He's like R2 and 3PO rolled into one with a unique attitude of his own, despite his menacing appearance. You get the sense that you're glad he's on your side, because he would otherwise be quite frightening. Jedi Fallen Order players know what I'm talking about.
Visitation is not permitted.
My least favorite moment of the movie is this totally extraneous cameo by Dr. Evazan and Ponda Baba. Those barflies from the Mos Eisley Cantina, who just don't look right in the open daylight and probably should have been left on the cutting room floor. They find themselves caught up in an ambush on an Imperial convoy. After the shootout, we encounter Chirrut Imwe and Baze Malbus, former guardians of a Jedi temple. Chirrut and Baze introduce the theme of faith as a counterbalance to the theme of death, and it is the main route this movie's emotional journey takes on its way to its eventual message of hope. That may be the most pretentious bullshit I have ever written. Chirrut is blind, but he can still kick ass and stick ass. Don't keep that rhyme going too long. He also has the most faith in the Force out of anyone in this particular tale, and even prays often.
I'm one with the Force is with me. I'm one with the Force.
He's praying for the door to open.
It bothers him because he knows it's possible. Baze Malbus was once the most devoted guardian of us all.
Baze's personality is centered around his heavy automatic blaster, and unlike Chirrut, he has lost faith in the Force over the years of Imperial occupation. Unfortunately, the character motivations of Baze and Chirrut are a little bit threadbare. They are simply tag-alongs who join in the adventure for no other reason than transitory convenience. The duo justifies their presence by interweaving a theme of optimism through the story that otherwise seems obsessed with death. Another common criticism that some will ding Rogue One for is the convoluted nature of its plot leading up to the final act. But don't you see, it's actually very simple. Jyn's father, Galen Erso, a dissident Imperial scientist, sends her to live with Saw Gerrera, an extremist rebel who raises Jyn as a freedom fighter until she gets caught by the Empire, but she's later broken out of prison by the Rebel Alliance, who have cooked up a plot to use Jyn to get in touch with Saw, who has a prisoner, Bodhi, who has information from Galen about a so-called planet killer.
Planet killer!
Which of course turns out to be the Death Star.
The Death Star.
And the information turns out to be that he sabotaged it. Okay, so yeah, frankly this plot is very convoluted, but it's probably no more convoluted than the kind of wet work that goes on in the real world. The political allegories of Star Wars are usually subtle enough that you don't notice them if you aren't looking for them, such as the Cold War anxieties of the original trilogy or the palace intrigue of the prequels. Surprisingly, Rogue One picked up on one of the more clever political remarks Star Wars ever made, and then carried it to its logical conclusion. Back in the Clone Wars 5th season, there's a storyline where Anakin comes up with the idea of training rebels to fight the Separatists on neutral worlds.
With training and resources, they get attack soft targets while the Republic continues to engage them on the battlefield.
That sounds like terrorism, Anakin.
Well, I think of it as an insurgency, to help realign these planets with the Republic.
This leads to the first appearance of Saw Gerrera, and a very early iteration of what would eventually become the Rebel Alliance.
Who are you? I'm Saw Gerrera. What do you want?
Your freedom, sire. You're to be executed tomorrow, but I'm getting you out of here.
I do not know whose decision it was to include Saw Gerrera in the story of Rogue One, but it was something of a stroke of brilliance. When we last saw him, he was the charismatic leader of the original ragtag rebel crew. Since then, he's somehow become like Vader, more machine than man. I'm sure it's no coincidence that Saw's partisan militia bears such a strong resemblance to real-world terrorists. I think that Saw's story, as it is now germinated across multiple eras of Star Wars lore, is a simple allegory for the politics of proxy wars.
The Clone War may have ended, but a civil war is about to begin.
To use the Middle East as a notable modern example, many of the terrorist groups in that region got their startup as rebellions armed and trained by the CIA to counter against Soviet influence in the region, only to become thorns in the side for US foreign policy decades later. This really isn't much of a stretch from Saw's militia getting its startup as freedom fighters, armed and trained by the future Darth Vader to counter against separatist influence in their star system, only to become a thorn in the side for the Empire decades later.
And we must not train terrorists.
Rebels.
To be clear, I don't think that there's some deep, sophisticated political statement here, but it would be one of the few times that Disney's Lucasfilm has demonstrated the wherewithal to incorporate prior art in such a thematically consistent way. It was also the first time an animation original character would be translated to live action, and he was portrayed by Forrest freakin' Whitaker. We had achieved levels of respect for Clone Wars lore that I had not believed possible. The only problem was that the animated character's eyes were extremely green. Come to think of it, the Sith's eyes turn yellow when they fall to the dark side. Maybe your eyes can turn brown if you've seen enough shit. By the time we're out of Rogue One's second act, we've racked up our tally of deaths and death-related symbols even further. The aptly named Death Star vaporizes the entire city on Jeddah.
The whole city?
All of it.
We don't have much time to mourn as the pace picks up and the stakes raise higher. And now Bodhi is along for the ride now too. You know, Bodhi? He spends most of the movie regathering his marbles after Bor Gullet scrambled him. But at least he remembers Galen's last known whereabouts, an Imperial facility on Edu. Jyn is under the impression that they are going to rescue her father, but Cassian is really going to assassinate him, at least per the orders given to him off the record.
There will be no extraction. You find him, you kill him.
But one crash landing and a broken radio later, Cassian loses contact with Rebel Command, and without confirmation that he is on mission, General Draven gets to deliver one of the most badass lines in the movie.
Squadron up. Target Edu.
Regardless, Cassian is still very much on mission to kill Galen, as is Jyn, except to rescue him. Jyn's heartbreaking reunion with her father right before his death makes for a stirring moment. Not to mention our 78th reminder that this movie is obsessed with death. Afterward, aboard a stolen cargo shuttle courtesy of Bodhi, a conflict flares up between Jyn and Cassian over what just happened.
You lied to me.
I've been in this fight since I was 6 years old.
You can't talk your way around this.
I don't have to. Yavin 4. Make sure they know we're coming in with a stolen ship. Anybody else?
To add as an afterthought, the dispensable villain of the moment for Rogue One is Director Krennic, an overambitious middle manager who takes the fall for everything going wrong with the Empire's plans. I don't have much to say about him. Meanwhile, at the Hall of Justice, a bickersome board meeting of the Rebel Alliance gives a chance to have that lowest point feeling that TV episodes are supposed to give you before the last commercial break.
Rebellions are built on hope.
There is no hope.
I say we fight!
I say the rebellion is finished!
I'm sorry. Without the full support of the Council, the odds are too great.
So get used to that feeling for the next half hour. While the bigwigs remain unconvinced, the dregs of the rebellion, the ones who do the dirty work, want to offer up themselves for something greater. An enlightening sense of optimism springs from an unlikely place. Rogue One may not get everything right from the filmmakers or the critics' point of view, but it exists to capture the intersection of death and hope, sacrifice. To give up that which you have in the present for the sake of others and the future. The Rebel Thug Life Brigade climbs aboard Bodhi's shuttle, whereupon he makes his biggest contribution to the movie.
That ship's off limits. No one's supposed to be on board until further instructions.
Yes, we are. Affirmative.
That's an impounded Imperial ship. What's your call sign, pilot?
Rogue One.
Rogue One? There is no Rogue One.
Well, there is now.
There's a tense calm before the storm, but when the final battle begins, the brakes are off. For sheer spectacle entertainment value, this may be the best war ever fought among the stars. The various fronts of the battle are intercut with one another, all 5 or 6 of them, between Bodhi at the landing pad, Baze and Chirrut in the ground battle, Director Krennic yelling at people, Jyn, Cassian, and K2 stealing the data from the tower, but the most impressive of all these intercut sequences are the space and aerial sequences.
We're going in!
This battle is one of the most engaging and elaborate in the franchise history. Like a spiritual successor to the space battle from Return of the Jedi, which pushed the limit of what was possible with conventional compositing techniques at the time, with modern digital technology, such constraints no longer exist. And yet the digital artists are speaking the same language as their predecessors did with models and motion controls.
This is Admiral Reddish of the Rebel Alliance. All squadron leaders report in.
Admiral, this is Blue Leader standing by.
Score 1 for the overuse of CGI. The most cynical among us might be willing to call this sequence nostalgia baiting or key jangling with so many incorporations of imagery from A New Hope.
It's a better bridge. Like, we all hated Rogue One because it was like Star Wars porn on crack. You know? And it was like too much.
I would be willing to agree with that if, say for example, there was a story that took place 30 years after A New Hope, where knockoff brand Rebels and Imperials flew nearly identical X-Wings and TIE fighters. Then yeah, I would call that nostalgia bait. In Rogue One's case, it's actually replicating the setting of that original film, as if A New Hope and Rogue One are both period films about the same historical era. The fact that people love X-Wings and TIE fighters so much is just icing on the cake for the audience as well as the marketing department. It wouldn't be a Star Wars space battle without cockpit shots of the X-Wing pilots getting shot down. These kinds of shots have always been some of the most violent imagery in the saga. They always kind of freaked me out when I was a kid, but they're a natural fit for Rogue One and its casual frankness about death. As a matter of fact, Star Wars has always had a casual frankness about death. In A New Hope, very little time is regarded to the loss of life in Alderaan, much less the Death Star.
You're safe. When we heard about Alderaan, we feared the worst.
We have no time for SARS, Commander.
Rebels, stormtroopers, clones, aliens, you name it, are constantly getting gunned down or shoved from great heights or eaten or blown up. Only 4 major characters in the saga get proper funeral scenes. Qui-Gon, Shmi, Padme, and Anakin. Wait, is Qui-Gon the father?
I can't explain what happened.
Table that thought. Rogue One is the logical extension of this casual frankness about death. None of the heroes of Rogue One get funeral scenes, but they each go down in glorious fashion, one by one, giving it all to get those plans the hell out of Dodge. Each of their death scenes is, for the most part, roughly proportional to what they contribute to the overall caper. First, K2 gets blasted full of holes while locating the plans in the database. His death is a signal that this is where the fun ends. Chirrut proves himself worthy to pull the master switch from the pedestal of time. Bodhi manages to make some vital communications before getting nated.
This is Admiral Reddish, Rogue One. We hear you!
They found the Death Star plans. They have to transmit them from the communications tower. You have to take down the shield gate.
It's the only way they're gonna get them through. Stand by, Rogue One. We're on it!
This is for you, Caleb.
Baze's death, as a counterpoint, actually accomplishes nothing for the ultimate goal, but is perhaps the most poignant of all, and deserves special attention. In textbook character development terms, K2, Bodhi, and Chirrut don't change much over the course of Rogue One, but we get a lot out of Baze in his final moments. And not just for him as a character, but for our takeaway from this whole movie. Since we met him, he has been the most cynical and the least faithful, yet he sticks by Chirrut's side till the end. He appears to return to the faith that he once had in the Force by taking on Chirrut's prayer chant. As for his actions that follow, I have to wonder if he wasn't actually praying to the dark side of the Force to help him vanquish the Death Troopers.
The Force is with me. I'm with the Force.
Mission failed! We'll get them next time.
The sequence that ends up having the most emotional content is Jyn and Cassian's. Their travel is methodically timed out over the course of the battle. I always love this one tiny intercut, just a few seconds long, where they break a glass panel and all you hear is the sound of broken glass chiming in descent before cutting back to the battle outside.
Step back.
The musical score starts pumping with this oppressive two-note interval that just stresses you out.
Who are you?
You know who I am. You will never win. You've lost.
This part is all very 80s, 90s action movie. It works, but it doesn't truly feel special until this final moment.
Rogue One, may the Force be with you.
It's a pretty bold move for a movie to put its audience in the perspective of total thermal annihilation, but from what we've seen so far, what did we expect? What else could you do in this situation except be held in the arms of someone that you have gotten along with solace in the fact that you stole the key to destroying the weapon that's destroying you? And we, the fans who have already seen all these movies a bunch of times, take solace in the fact that the adventures of Luke Skywalker are about to begin. It's impossible for me to be objective about Rogue One. When viewed through the lens of a Star Wars fan, Rogue One is better than the sum of its parts. The characters are no deeper or more dynamic than that of your conventional action movie cast, yet those character interactions can leap from the screen in ways you don't expect.
There is more than one sort of prison, Captain. I sense that you carry yours wherever you go.
The digital effects sequences are not just temples, but load-bearing beams. The music detours from John Williams just enough to feel distinct, and yet revisits old themes often enough for the needed splash of familiar flavor. Its mixture of dark and hopeful themes creates a regret-absolving state of mind, as if you're at peace with death. In some ways, this movie does make me feel at peace with death. At least as far as Star Wars goes. I know I still have a lot of work to do on this mortal plane, but as far as experiencing this remarkable science fiction fantasy saga that has become such an important part of our popular mythology, I can safely say that the part of me who was a Star Wars fan can die happy. I can move on with my life. It's not December 2016 anymore. It's June 2022. As usual, there's no way the world could get any crazier than it is right now. And now we can't even count on Star Wars as an escape anymore. But for some reason, I did manage to write this entire video script about Rogue One 5.5 years in retrospect, without once feeling the need to mention Leia, Tarkin, or Darth Vader.